CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories: Ukraine battles to restore electricity supplies after Russian drone strikes. President Putin ponders his military options as the winter sets in. Our other headlines: the death toll from the Democratic Republic of Congo's flooding has now risen to nearly 170 people. Morocco are playing Croatia in the World Cup third-place playoff. We're in Qatar for the latest. And why some of Austria's festive winter traditions are scaring the insurance companies from offering cover. Air raid sirens have sounded across Ukraine, including in the capital, Kyiv, just a day after Russia carried out one of the biggest missile strikes on the country's critical infrastructure. The Kremlin says President Putin has been consulting with his commanders on how they think this military campaign should now proceed. Our correspondent Ken Brown reports.
Air raid sirens sounded across Ukraine a day after Russia staged one of its biggest assaults since the start of the conflict. Over 70 missiles were fired on Friday. The second largest city, Kharkiv, was without power, forcing the government to order blackouts nationwide. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky's response was defiant.
Whatever the rocket worshippers from Moscow are counting for, it still won't change the balance of power in this war. They still have enough missiles for several such massive strikes. We will have enough determination and self-balance to return what is ours after these strikes.
Shelling continued overnight, and 3 people were reportedly killed in Kryvyi Rih in the Dnipro region, whilst another person lost their life in Kherson. 13 others were injured by the attacks, including 4 children, according to the Ukrainian authorities. Meanwhile, the Kremlin has announced it will formulate a response to the latest round of sanctions issued by the European Union against its country. The EU has banned investment in Russia's mining industry and placed more than 200 people on the sanctioned list. Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and the Russian Chief of Staff met with Vladimir Putin to brief him on the latest developments and discuss the next steps in the conflict. Russian and Belarus soldiers have organized joint exercises. Soldiers practice ground assaults with the use of drones and personnel carriers. Belarus has repeatedly said it would not join Russia in its offensive, although their president Alexander Lukashenko did give permission for Russian forces to enter Ukraine at the start of the conflict back in February. Kyiv's mayor Vitaly Klitschko has said the metro service and their water supply are back in service following the latest strikes on the capital. Residents of the city kept their spirits up by singing Ukrainian folk songs and dancing as they took shelter on Friday from the latest round of attacks. Moscow says attacks on energy infrastructure were militarily legitimate. The Ukraine government said they were intended to cause maximum civilian suffering and should be classified as a war crime. Ken Brown, CGTN, Madrid.
Well, let's talk to Stefan Wolf, Professor of International Security at the University of Birmingham. Stefan, thank you very much for coming back on the programme. Ukraine trying to restore power after those missile strikes. What is this chapter of this conflict about? What's going on? Let's do a sit-rep.
Well, I think what this is really about is Russia trying to break the will of the Ukrainian people to resist the war and the completely illegitimate invasion that Russia has carried out of Ukraine since the end of February this year. And the way they are trying to do this is by attacking, as you said earlier and as we heard in your report, critical national infrastructure. So that takes out the energy grid. That has immediate implications then also for the supply of heating, for the supply of water, and it really hurts the Ukrainian population very badly. There's no immediate military effect of this, so Russian justifications, so-called, that this serves any military purpose are completely false. And it's absolutely correct what President Zelensky said, that these are illegal actions under international humanitarian law, so they are in fact war crimes.
Western support and Western resolve seems undimmed. Where do you see this conflict going next?
Well, I think what we'll see is over the next couple of weeks and months, this will be very much the pattern. So for as long as Russia has enough missiles, has enough drones, it will continue carrying out these attacks. I'm very skeptical that we will see any major changes in where the current front lines are. Neither side really has the capacity at the moment to progress much by way of any offensive operations. And I think for the most part, things will now depend on how quickly Western partners can supply Ukraine with more effective air defense systems, so that also then the repairs of the Ukrainian national infrastructure can go ahead more quickly without being again disrupted by renewed attacks from Moscow.
This week we saw President Putin's annual traditional press conference cancelled, and we also saw there just a few moments ago President Putin talking to his top military personnel, quizzing them perhaps on how they think the conflict in Ukraine should proceed. It's impossible to guess, I suppose, but can we talk about the domestic support in Russia for this conflict? What do we know?
Well, what we know is that, first of all, I mean, the information space in Russia is very tightly controlled. So it's very difficult to gauge to what extent ordinary Russians actually have information about what is going on in Ukraine. Second point is that the latest polls that were carried out, as far as I know, back in October, still suggested quite significant Russian popular support for the invasion of Ukraine. I don't think that is going to change much, primarily because, contrary to what the Ukrainian population is suffering, there's no comparable suffering of the Russian population as a result of this war. Yes, there are sanctions. Yes, there are certain shortages of supplies, but there's nowhere near the kind of damage to the provision of public services that Ukrainians are currently experiencing. So from that perspective, I don't think we are in a situation where it's very likely that there will be any large-scale Russian protests or riots against this war.
Stefan Wolf, Professor of International Security at the University of Birmingham, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The death toll in the Democratic Republic of Congo continues to rise after days of flooding. The United Nations says at least 169 people have now died as heavy rain and landslides caused widespread damage in the capital, Kinshasa. The president says climate change was to blame for the disaster. Our correspondent Chris Okamringa reports.
Very many people have been forced to relocate to other areas. They're living with their neighbors and relatives across the city because many of them had built houses in hilly areas that are prone to floods. And so we have been told by the government that 38,000 houses flooded, 280 of them were swept away by the landslides. And so it's a very terrible situation. Many people are mourning their loved ones. The government announced 3 days of national mourning, which ended on Friday, and they have formed emergency teams to try and provide food, water, medicine, and psychosocial support to the victims of this natural disaster. Many of the hospitals here are not well equipped, and so they have been, overwhelmed by the number of people who have been taken there with injuries, and they have asked international aid organizations like the UN and a number of others to support them. They had a meeting, the government had a meeting with the UN on Friday, and they have agreed to, help in trying to rescue some of these people who were seriously injured by this disaster. President Felix Tshisekedi, made that statement while in Washington, D.C. while he was attending the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. And he did that because he was trying to remind the U.S. and other wealthy nations about the commitments they made during the COP26 summit in Glasgow. They promised to provide funding to low-income countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo to be able to mitigate climate change. So he was saying that this is one of the reasons. If you people don't support us, then these kinds of disasters will keep happening. And certainly there are other reasons, like, Kinshasa is a city of about 15 million people. Very many people cannot afford to live around the city center because it's very expensive. So they have to go very miles away in areas that are prone to floods. And then the city also has a very poor drainage system. Many people dump waste in drainage channels. So when it rains, it gets blocked, and that is why the flooding happens. And so authorities are coming up with some drastic measures to ensure that this doesn't happen again. They said they'll start demolishing houses constructed illegally on structures in the hilly areas across the city, and they will also start, seriously following up on the construction plans in the country.
Chris Okamringa, our correspondent in Kinshasa. The death toll from a landslide that tore through a campsite in Malaysia has risen to 24 after rescue teams recovered the bodies of a woman and 2 children. 9 people are still missing, and the head of the rescue effort says the chances of finding more survivors are now slim. The landslide flattened the camp north of Kuala Lumpur on Friday while people slept in their tents. Officials say the campsite had been operating illegally. The United States House Committee investigating last year's riot on Capitol Hill is reportedly set to recommend 3 criminal charges against Donald Trump. They will seek an unprecedented charge of insurrection against the former president. Trump supporters stormed Congress in January 2021 in a bid to overturn his election defeat. Trump denies any wrongdoing. The panel is expected to publish its final report next week. Billionaire Elon Musk has reinstated the Twitter accounts of several journalists who reported on his activities. Journalists on the New York Times, CNN and the Washington Post are all on the list. Their accounts were suspended after Musk accused them of sharing location data about him. The Twitter boss changed his mind after a majority of Twitter users supported lifting the ban. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Croatia lead Morocco 2-1 in the third-place playoff. We're in the World Cup in Qatar next.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
This week on Razor's Biodiversity Special, a community coming together to save an endangered species vital to fresh waterways, and scientists working to bring back one of the most biodiverse ecosystems on the planet.
We scientists need to be actually out there trying to change things rather than studying the loss and the decline of these oceans that once supported us.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. Ukraine battles to restore electricity supplies after Russian drone strikes. President Putin ponders his military options as the winter sets in. Our other headlines: the death toll from the Democratic Republic of Congo's flooding has risen to nearly 170 people. Morocco are playing Croatia in the World Cup third-place playoff. The bronze medal match has often been referred to as the game that no team wants to play, but Morocco's manager says his side are desperate to secure a first-ever third-place finish for an African side at the World Cup. Croatia, meanwhile, finished as runners-up in 2018 and could make it successive second- and third-place finishes. The winning team, of course, will also earn an additional $2 million from the game. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Dan Williams in Doha. Dan, how's that third-place match going?
Yeah, often these games can be a little dull and you know, not too much excitement, but this one's been anything but. Plenty of entertainment, both sides really going for it. Croatia currently leading this match 2-1. 2 goals in the first 10 minutes, it has to be said. Croatia taking the lead. Morocco hit back almost straight away before Mislav Orsic had a beautiful goal, just hit it just above the keeper. Wonderful finish from him. All of that in the first half. But Morocco running out of time, it has to be said, to try and finish with that bronze medal that the manager so wants, of course, to end this World Cup on a high. Now, a lot has been said, of course, the first Arab country to reach the semi-finals, first African team to reach the semi-finals, but this is a team that has fully deserved to be here in this late stage of this World Cup, and they're wanting to give the fans, many fans wanting Morocco to win inside the stadium and out, I can say all around this square here as well, wanting to give those fans something to really celebrate at the end of what's been this terrific World Cup. But yeah, time's running out. Croatia winning this one at the moment.
And of course, less than 24 hours until the World Cup final, and a really exciting contest between Argentina and France.
Yeah, this really promises, doesn't it, to be a real classic between these two football heavyweights. Of course, both sides won it two times each. Which one is going to be the one that can celebrate a hat-trick of titles? France, of course, are the holders. They're looking to become the first team to win back-to-back World Cups since Brazil did that in 1962. You think about all those West Germany sides, Brazil during the 90s and others, you know, that just couldn't quite do the back-to-back titles. And certainly, you know, they're going to be worried somewhat by the illness that has swept through the camp there, France, through this week, impacted their semi-final. A couple of players not fit for that, and a couple of players not training this week. We understand that the squad did pretty much train fully this evening, so looks like this story is moving away, thankfully, for Didier Deschamps, the French coach, but that, of course, will be a concern, and they'll be closely monitoring that in the meantime. Argentina, of course, for them, the story is all about Lionel Messi and whether he will end his career with that World Cup title that has so far eluded him. A little earlier, I caught up with Yuri Djorkaeff, who won the title with Didier Deschamps back in 1998, and he says well, he's backing France, as you would expect, but also on top of that, he says that France's achievements here are very much fully deserved.
A big and great achievement, because if you're looking about the story of the national team, we're starting to win in '98. Since '98, we play 4 finals. It's unbelievable. I mean, today I think, I'm not just thinking, I believe that we are on the map of the football. You know, before you were talking about Brazil, Germany, sometime Italy. You know, but today you know that France, whatever happening, they will finish in the final 4.
Excitement, has to be said, is building here. There's a lot of bars and restaurants all around. You can hear the third, fourth playoff game taking place at the moment. A lot of people watching that. People out here in Souk Waqif playing football, as you can see behind me. Just a lot of people really enjoying this last weekend of the World Cup here in Qatar.
Dan, thank you for that. Our correspondent Dan Williams in Doha. Now it's crunch time at COP15 as the biggest biodiversity conference in a decade enters its final stage. More than 100 environment ministers have been taking part in the summit in Montreal in Canada. Their goal is to try to reach consensus on a global framework to protect at least 30% of the Earth's land and sea. Countries have agreed to invest more money to try to reverse ecological damage. Well, salt marshes are hugely beneficial to the environment, capturing large amounts of carbon as well as reducing flooding risk. But with over half of these areas lost and others threatened by coastal erosion, efforts are underway to try to recreate them. Our correspondent Kitty Logan reports now from the UK's largest salt marsh restoration project.
This landscape was transformed in recent years from farmland to salt marsh. Leftover soil shipped in from a London rail project created Wallasey Island, a vast man-made nature reserve. Trapped between the land and sea, a salt marsh has unique biodiversity. And under the watchful eye of the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, this site now hosts up to 30,000 birds in winter, including geese and wading birds.
And all that vegetation and the plants and the insects and all the other invertebrates that now live in the mud have come in naturally, and the birds have found it, and so they've also come in to live here and feed here. But particularly at this time of year, they're starting to come down from winter.
These tidal marshes wash in seeds, helping plants establish quickly. Mud builds up too as water flows in and out, hiding rare invertebrates for birds to feed on, and something else crucial for the planet.
Carbon is stored in this mud, so each year a little bit more carbon will be stored in these salt marshes and mudflats around us.
That's amazing, so it just builds up as a kind of carbon store?
Definitely, yeah, that's it.
Researchers are still exploring the full potential of these mudflats, but initial studies show they could lock in thousands of tonnes of carbon in just a few years.
This is the biggest salt marsh restoration project in the UK, and it's already proving a haven for both birds and biodiversity. And here, in this mud, is a vital tool in the fight against climate change.
Saltwater plants can also act as a barrier against sea rises, and they're part of the process of storing carbon too.
And so this combination of the plants growing on there, on these sites, and the carbon that's brought in, and the sediment that then builds up, means that carbon's then locked away. And so that means they can potentially mitigate some of our climate change.
Over half of the UK's salt marshes have been lost, drained for agriculture and development. And in some areas, coastal erosion and rising sea levels are pushing them further back, making this new reserve even more important.
It's bringing these multiple benefits that salt marshes provide. So it's created new salt marsh, it's created new carbon storage, it's created new flood risk prevention, and it's created this amazing place for biodiversity.
The sea barrier here should shelter these salt marshes from any future storm surges, protecting the varied habitats like lagoons with islands made for nesting birds. This reserve is living proof that nature can recover given the chance. The aim now is to create more areas just like it. Kitty Logan, CGTN, Essex.
Krampus is a beast-like fictional character from Austrian folklore who keeps naughty children in order in the run-up to Christmas. But it's not just the children who are taking fright. Austria's insurance companies are running scared too. They think this custom is just too violent. Our correspondent Johannes Pleshberger has the story.
As the nights grow longer and colder, Krampus impersonators hit the streets in the Austrian mountain village of Kolbnitz. The horned monsters are meant to scare children into good behavior. Anyone who makes fun of the creatures gets whipped on the leg.
They hit the people. And it's funny.
It's a very normal custom. Those who don't like it should stay at home.
The tradition, which dates back to pre-Christian times, has experienced a boom in recent years, not only in Austria, but also in Bavaria, northern Italy and Slovenia. Almost every village in the Eastern Alps has its own Krampus group. But this year some parades were scaled back or cancelled altogether, because insurance companies have stopped covering these events.
We wanted to insure our Krampus association, but the insurance companies didn't want us. They said we are a high-risk group. There is too much risk of damage.
Doing business with the monstrous tradition no longer pays off for many insurers.
Too many people have been injured at Krampus parades in recent years, costing insurers millions of dollars. The usually low insurance rate of a few $100s which Krampus groups pay cannot cover these costs, local brokers told me.
Ulrich Gradnitzer from the Red Cross says that on average about 2 people are injured at every parade.
The barricades, they get into their stomachs or into their belly, people are hurt. That's the most injuries getting from the Krampus.
But Gradnitzer also says insurance companies are being cheated by spectators.
Sometimes they have to be brought to the hospital, but most of the time it's just because they want to get money, or it's an insurance thing because they say they hit me too hard or they hit my girlfriend. But normally there are no bad injuries from the Krampus.
In order to preserve the Krampus tradition, Austria's villages are taking ever stricter safety precautions during the parades. Some municipalities have even started providing insurance coverage for the Krampus groups themselves. Tamed, if not beaten, this Alpine Christmas Fright Fest looks set to scare for many more winters to come. Johannes Bleschberger, CGTN, Kolbnitz, Austria.
Italy has officially lit the world's biggest Christmas tree display, covering an area the size of 30 football fields. Our correspondent Hermione Kitson travelled to Umbria for the lighting ceremony.
Italy and the world's biggest Christmas tree is officially lit and spreading holiday cheer.
It's stupendous. It's a beautiful emotion every year.
The display is located in the medieval Umbrian town of Gubbio and stretches 450 metres wide and 750 metres tall across Mount Ingino.
The tree has become an international icon, recognized amongst the most significant Christmas trees in the world, like those in New York or Australia.
The decoration consists of 7.5 kilometres of electric cables and hundreds of lights. The star is located at the basilica of the local patron saint, Ubaldo.
It's visible from a great distance, and even some aeroplanes at this time of the year modify their routes to fly by and see it.
Some of those given the honour of lighting the tree in previous years include Pope Francis and Italian astronaut Paolo Nespoli. The Gubbio Christmas tree has been an annual spectacle since 1981, and in 1991 it officially entered the Guinness Book of Records. More than 3 decades later, its title remains unchallenged. The committee in charge of the tree says in addition to attracting tourists, it also plays a crucial role in the town's cultural heritage.
It's a big commitment because every Sunday from September, volunteers of all ages come together to bring the tree to life. There are 64 people in the committee, and it's a tradition handed down over generations.
For a €10 donation, each of the lights are adopted and dedicated to a loved one. At a difficult time for many, the mayor hopes it can be a symbol of solidarity.
This year I would like the tree to be a symbol of peace, because with the air of war that we breathe for so many months, we also need a message of hope.
Hermione Kitson, CGTN, Gubbio.
Next up, it's Juliet Mann with the agenda. In this week's show, Britain's sailor shame, why dozens of Chinese seamen were forcibly repatriated at the end of the Second World War. That's the agenda, right after the World Today at 16:30 GMT, here on CGTN. And that is the World Today. Thank you for watching. More news coming up at the top of this hour. For now, and all the team,